Oh, look at that. Love to hear that. Okay,
There
I'm
you
going to
go.
share my screen. Thanks, everybody. And share a couple of slides really quickly. All right. So I'll go through these quickly. Folks can drop questions in the chat as I'm speaking, and we'll make sure we have time to talk about them through the end. But just to start off, what the heck is natural infrastructure? And I think it was interesting that this came up even in the chat during the opening session, because you may have heard this term, you may have heard the term green infrastructure, or natural climate solutions, nature-based solutions. I like this image. It's from NOAA, and it really shows the diversity of sort of what natural infrastructure is. So at NWF, we generally think of natural infrastructure as natural or nature mimicking systems that provide essential services to and benefits to society. So that can be everything from flood protection to erosion control to water purification. You can see here we're talking about things like urban forestry. So a park in Pittsburgh can count as natural infrastructure. A living shoreline, green roofs, oyster beds, wetlands, coral, sand dunes, a forest. Someone in the chat this morning mentioned climate smart agriculture. So thinking around, cover crops in agricultural spaces, all of that we think of as natural infrastructure. Why does it matter? Let me see if I can advance my slides here. Yeah, so natural infrastructure can deliver both climate mitigation and climate adaptation outcomes. So some I think impressive stats on the mitigation side. So that's when I'm thinking about sequestering and storing carbon. It has a huge potential, and we need to really reduce our emissions if we are to prevent the worst impacts of climate change sort of globally. And we need to use nature as an ally, and natural infrastructure is a really powerful way to do that. So conserving, restoring, better managing all of our lands and waters can mitigate the amount of emissions equivalent to like all cars and trucks on the road. So we're talking about really big numbers here. Another just fun fact, in 2018, forests in the US sequestered the same amount of CO2 as equivalent to emissions from 194 coal-fired power plants in a year. So you may not think of, the natural infrastructure or nature that has this important power to actually reduce emissions, but it really does. The other, when I mentioned,
yes.
If folks don't mind muting if they're not speaking, that would be great, just so we can, I think you can use the little mute button, thanks. So nature and natural infrastructure can also improve resilience to climate change. So it can help communities cope with the increasing impacts of climate change. And there are just some stats here. Maybe I'll point out quickly the floodplains, and protecting floodplains is a really powerful way to protect communities from flooding. I think this is useful to point out because, and particularly in Appalachia, we've seen the risks from inland flooding, from surface flooding and riverine flooding. Just this past year, those risks are only expected to grow due to things like development, population growth, and plus an increase in the frequency and intensity of heavy rainfall. So protecting and restoring our floodplains is another example of a natural climate solution that's, I think, going to be particularly important for Appalachia. And then there's a bunch of other co-benefits to natural infrastructure. And when I say co-benefits, I mean things like natural infrastructure is also can protect or conserve wildlife habitat, can help improve our water quality, can help create clean air, can protect, provide spaces that are important, that hold important spiritual or cultural value for communities, can improve mental health, and can also create jobs. And I'm going to touch on this briefly, but I think land force is a great example of this. And I know Thomas will talk about it more, but really optimizing the potential for land to store carbon requires a pretty big investment in jobs to deliver the restoration of forests and wetlands and floodplains, all the things I mentioned. These jobs tend to be durable and can often be concentrated in rural or semi-rural places, so places that are common across Appalachia. And we at NWF talk about this restoration economy, and we know that the kinds of work we're talking about to build this natural infrastructure and to maintain it and to support it supports like a multi-billion-dollar restoration economy in the U.S. that employs thousands of people. So there's a really big potential here to create a lot of jobs in a lot of our communities through thoughtful investments in natural infrastructure. And then quickly on the federal context. So our speakers this morning mentioned two big bills, our friends Bill and Ira, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. These are major investments, federal bills that have a lot of investments related to climate and clean energy, among other things. the Inflation Reduction Act in total has about $370 billion in climate spending. That includes, natural infrastructure, but also things like clean energy. And the bipartisan infrastructure law in total is approximately $1 trillion. So a lot of money that's coming through federal agencies for a lot of different things. I do want to flag one thing. Earlier versions of these bills did include a creation of a new civilian climate corps, and those fell out of the legislation that eventually got passed, but there's talk about potential for a new CCC in the Farm Bill, and there'll actually be a workshop on that tomorrow at the strategy session, so I encourage folks to attend that if you're interested. And there's not time, and I think it can be overwhelming if I just go through and list all the federal opportunity, the programs and the dollar amounts in these bills. We can sort of talk about some of those in detail in the discussion question section if you'd like. But just to note, and I think Alicia from Land Force, I might be mispronouncing your name, apologies, talked a little bit about some of the programs this morning, but things like the US Forest Service dollars for maintaining or restoring roads. There's a lot of money coming through agencies like NOAA for like watershed and water related restoration work. There's a lot of money coming through the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, for climate smart agriculture. A lot of money flowing through the EPA for big like EJ block grants that you could use for natural infrastructure. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. I'm happy to share some resources in the chat that sort of breakdown of where some of these programs are, because I think that's the first step, is understanding, like, just getting your brain around what are the opportunities out there and when is due what's a grant, what's a money that's flowing through the state, what has match requirements, what doesn't. All of that can be overwhelming. So Reimagine wants to play a role in helping folks and communities navigate that. But all to say, there's a lot of opportunities out there. I want to make sure that communities know these opportunities and can use them to further natural infrastructure projects. And the Biden administration also has an interest in using a lot of the dollars in these two bills for natural infrastructure, and have put out some resources to help encourage federal agencies to do a better job of promoting natural infrastructure. So a lot of potential, a lot of allies in the Biden administration who want to see these bills further natural infrastructure all across the US. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Thomas.
That was great. There was a question that was in the chat earlier in the big group thing about what the difference between natural infrastructure and green infrastructure was. And I think your slideshow did a really good job of explaining that. So thank you very much. All right, so how do I do this? View slideshow, there we go, okay. All right, so I am Thomas Gettner. I'm the Director of Land Stewardship at Land Force. We are a nonprofit workforce development agency here in Pittsburgh. So what we do is we hire adults with barriers to employment, and we have a training program that trains on land stewardship skills as well as soft skills that will make someone better suited for future employment with family sustaining wages. Here is a picture of us over top of the city skyline last year. This is part of our cohort from 2022. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are very specific to Pittsburgh and filling Pittsburgh needs. Nothing that I'm speaking of is proprietary. You are welcome to take inspiration from it, do whatever you want with it. But a lot of our solutions are very Pittsburgh centric, and your region may have some different needs. Here we focus on a couple things, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But to tell you more about our program and our mission, we are investing in people and restoring land, and oftentimes we're asked what that means. And so the restoring land part of it, we'll explain that, but the people and investment, and realizing that our best potential is people who are oftentimes overlooked, people that are marginalized from employment and from investment in their own skill set. So that's what we like to think that we're doing. We're making an investment in people and investment in their skills. So what does that look like in the real world? So we've got two pillars here at Land Force. We've got our workforce development team, and we've got our land stewardship team. And on the workforce readiness side, a lot of times, we're meeting our crew members where they are, and that means that our workforce development staff comes out to sites, does one-on-ones, but we do a lot of thoughtful intakes to establish what barriers that people have and help them come up with goals and a plan to overcome those barriers so that they're better suited for long-term employment. Whereas on the land stewardship side, we are training in a lot of the hard skills, have a lot of contract opportunities to practice these skills, and all of our crew members' income, their wages, comes from our contract income as well. And we focus a lot on habitat restoration, trail construction, vacant lot management, and green infrastructure. So a little bit of a backstory here. We're going into our 8th season now, but through 7 seasons, we've had quite an impact. So being able to, make an impact on people's lives, build up a team, build up confidence in individuals' skill sets, and then help with job placement assistance so that we're able to place people with some pretty good jobs, and they're able to stick with those jobs and be very successful at them. So throughout our contributions to the local land stewardship, just this year, we surpassed that 55,000 hours mark, which we actually forgot about. It wasn't really on our radar. Then all of a sudden we ran a report and like, holy cow, we've been doing a lot of work. So time flies when you are having fun. And we have a lot of fun doing this work. Our crew members come away with an experience, but also we love our contract partners. We are partnering with a lot of other nonprofit land stewardship organizations here in Pittsburgh and the Allegheny County region, as well as some private developers and some municipalities and municipal authorities. One of the things that we're trying to do is equalize the earning potential of people here in Pittsburgh. I've chosen the greater Hazelwood neighborhood. Pittsburgh is a city made up of over 90 distinct neighborhoods. The greater Hazelwood neighborhood is 2 neighborhoods. It's Glen Hazel and Hazelwood. And so we have 3 different contracts that we're doing work there. We do a lot of direct recruitment from the neighborhood, working with some of the community group partners that we have there to help with our recruitment, so that we're hiring people to do work within their own community. So just wanted to contrast some of these numbers here, and you can see these numbers on the screen. But when it comes time to evaluate how livable Pittsburgh is for minority populations and for people that are typically disenfranchised from our workforce, we can see a great amount of disparity. So looking at the city's average versus the neighborhood average, you can see the disparity, almost half of the median household income, 3 times the poverty rate. Unemployment rate, those numbers are skewed, and that's why we had to put 56 people are no longer engaged in the workforce. People have just decided to drop out because they have so many barriers to sustaining employment. So historically, we're looking at Hazelwood as this former steel mill town. It was very booming. A lot of great things that were happening there. But through disinvestment, it's kind of become this area for gentrification, and it's become a technological hub. So Uber has a test track there. There's a couple different robotics companies that are working there too. But none of those new employment opportunities are benefiting the residents. None of the new development is really equitably affecting the residents in the way that a rising tide pulls up all boats. So it's not really having the effect that a lot of those tech companies are promising. So what we're trying to do is double down in recruiting from the neighborhood and working on holding contracts in the neighborhood so that those employment opportunities are there. So some of the things that we're working on, green infrastructure, this is just some of our numbers from this past year. But when we're working on green infrastructure, we're working for the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. We're working for the Borough of Carnegie. We're working in Hazelwood at what's known as the Alco site, Almano site. So it's a former brownfield. It's now kind of a tech hub from the area, but doing a lot of green infrastructure, stormwater management, maintenance work there. We do quite a bit of trail building and maintenance work. Of our 8 projects that we worked on in 2022, we maintained over 14 miles of trail. We did 1,000 feet of trail reroute and through a trouble area, constructed 29 box ups, 6 drainage features, and 1 16-foot long bridge. So one of the great things about the trail work that we do is oftentimes there are trail users out there when we're doing the work. And so our crew members get to be thanked firsthand for what they're doing. And they kind of come away not only with that instant gratification of seeing all the work that you did that day, but also having trail users thank them and be appreciative for the work so it doesn't go unnoticed. And I think that's one of the big barriers that some people have when they go out in the woods to do some work. They're like, well, who even uses this stuff? And so when we run into trail users and they thank us, I think it really does a lot to shift the attitudes of our crew members. Working on invasive plant management and reforestation. In Hazelwood, there's the Hazelwood Greenway. In Pittsburgh, we have a system of parks and greenways, and our outgoing mayor, as a final gift to everybody, said, okay, now half of these greenways are now parks, and you guys get to decide what to do with that. So what we've been doing in Hazelwood is a pilot project where we're helping take this passive greenway and turn it more into a passive park system. And that comes with a lot of invasive plant management. So we are doing a lot to cut bush honeysuckle. That's the picture that you see on the right there, and doing a lot of replanting. So 100 trees were planted this year in the Hazelwood Greenway area. Last year, we did 150 trees. Our partner on that project is Tree Pittsburgh, and we're also working with Allegheny Goatscape. Allegheny Goatscape is exactly what it sounds like. They bring goats in to do some natural vegetation management. Vacant lot and placemaking. So we're doing things like everything from creating community gardens, creating play areas that are for sensory play, creating gathering spaces, maintaining those spaces. We think that the vacant lots can be turned into assets rather than blighted areas. And so working on that brings a great deal of pride to our crew members because they oftentimes get to work within their own communities on these projects. Riparian zone remediation, doing a lot of planting, a lot of aftercare for the trees that have been planted, as well as a lot of erosion control with natural infrastructure. So on the right, you see one of our crew members from last year carrying a rock, and that's going to be laid along a stream bed that was starting to widen out a little bit. So using some of the natural stone that we were able to find on that area to reinforce and armor some of the banks. So our crew members come through this training program, and before we hire them to work on our contract season, during that training, they're getting a lot of certifications and a lot of trainings. And I'm not going to read the list here, but you can look and see what all this encompasses. But a lot of things that are going to look really good on a resume. We coach all of our crew members that when they go in for a job interview, maybe it's a warehouse, maybe they're getting into the culinary arts, and an employer is going to ask you, well, how is any of this relevant to what I'm going to be doing? And our crew members get to say, well, if this isn't relevant to you right now, what should be relevant to you is that I was asked to learn a lot of new things in a short period of time and apply them successfully, and this is my track record of doing that. So first aid and CPR is one of those things that an employer, they may not have to pay for you to get, and you may be a better hire because you are already coming with that certification. So there's a leg up there, but also understanding how to do all of these things and apply them very quickly on the job shows employers that you can do the same thing for them as well. So what do our crew members have to say about this experience? These are some quotes that we've gained from past couple years. The one quote that I don't have on here that it's hard to write down and it's easier to say is we had a troubled crew member last year. Some emotional issues and things that they were working through. This was a female crew member in her 40s, and a lot of this stuff was alienating at first, and then she started to find her way. But at one point, she was upset, and with a very raised voice, she yelled at us, "You made me care about trees." And I really wanted to laugh at that because it was an ironic way to say that. but I got what she was saying. We touched something inside of her that made her look at trees and the natural world differently. And she was upset with that because that took her to a place where she had to actually be invested in something, and she had to do something that was a little bit more meaningful and challenging than she may have ever encountered before. And that sense of alienation at the same time, coupled with that passion, you made me care about trees, was just such an impactful statement. But we really love where our crew members find that therapeutic nature of the work, the biophilia of touching trees and touching leaves and what it does for you. Oftentimes, if we are felling trees, there's a lot of buildup stress that you don't realize that you're relieving until you drop that tree or until you build a trail. The steep hills of Pittsburgh, mountains, if you will, we are literally moving these mountains to create trail systems. And that's something that there's a great amount of pride. Jessica, you made a comment a little bit earlier where us Appalachians like to talk about our street potential, and I'm going to do that again here, so bear with me. As the son of a displaced steelworker, it was up to me to decide, what does my future look like? And I kind of had to evaluate, what does Pittsburgh hold for me if I can't be a part of the steel industry? I should have just grown up and ended up with this job that has a pension, but that's not the way that the economics of the situation have worked out. I grew up less than 2 miles from a steel mill. I have asthma because of it. And if Pittsburgh was this polluted city, I might not have chosen to make this my long-term home. It just been the place that I was born and grew up in. But I looked at Pittsburgh as a way to reinvent the city in a way that I can establish my own legacy within it. So what my dad and my uncles built was the city and the country and all, through all the steelwork stuff. But building a natural infrastructure-based city that works out for all citizens is a great point of pride to me. So one of the things that I love to do is proselytize to our crew members about how they can make this part of their own legacy. You can come back to a tree that you planted 10 years ago with your kids and say, mom or dad planted this tree, mom or dad built this trail, this is what I did. And all of a sudden, you're no longer inhabiting a time and place. You are that time and place because of the contributions you made. So we really find that the way our crew members look at their experience and the way they take it away is kind of that non-monetary bonus that we get to take away from our work. And I absolutely love that. One of our crew members here, our site supervisor, Sean, has a great way of motivating all of our crew members, and that is this phrase, get involved. And so if you are looking to do land stewardship work, if you're looking to do workforce development coupled with land stewardship work, please reach out to me. I would love to share some of our best practices with you, point you in the right direction if I can, but we want you to get involved as well. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their time today. I want to thank Reimagine Appalachia for having me here to speak about this. So I appreciate that. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you particularly for sharing that story about yourself and your background. It's really, really powerful. And yeah, wonderful to hear. Yeah, so we'll, the slides will be shared out in a notes document that everyone will get. So yeah, folks will have the slides as well as the notes from the session today. So you will have all that, including our contact info. But we have the rest of the time for discussion. So Thomas and I have some Q&A, but I wanted to give space. Did anyone have questions for either of us on the presentations or anything you heard earlier? And George, I see your hand raised, so go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Jessica and Thomas, very informative and energizing. But I wanted to ask Jessica 2 questions, if I may. We have a pollinator project that we started with the help of a grant from DuPont Corporation. I'm in Marietta, Ohio. And DuPont is right across the river in Parkersburg, West Virginia. So we had a grant from them to build a pollinator plot near the confluence of the Muskingum and Ohio rivers. So my first question is, how can we leverage that grant and what we've done to expand our pollinator project to other parts of the city? Because we've been able to get some support of the mayor and the city council. with the pollinator project. So we'd like to leverage our DuPont grant to obtain some federal funds. My second question is, we have been blessed by someone moving to our area who was director of ecological restoration in the greater Chicago area. It has already immersed himself in ecological restoration here in Washington County. So I'd like to know where I could direct him for some federal funds to continue and expand his ecological restoration activities in Ohio and West Virginia.
Yeah, great questions. And I suspect others on the call might have particular thoughts about like, how do I get federal funding for this thing in my community, this project? I don't know, George, and I admit it, I don't know if there's particular elements of the bills that I mentioned, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, that are specifically for like pollinator support. There's certainly probably relevant things related to maybe some US Forest Service programs for like state and community and urban forestry, probably something through the USDA. I'm going to drop a couple links in the chat. And if others on the call know of other links, I think that'd be great to share, that are resources for wrapping your head around what opportunities there are, what federal funding opportunities there are in these bills. And one of them is this nature-based solutions database that my colleagues at NWF, mostly on our water team, put together. That's a searchable database for, as you see, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different terms that kind of mean the same thing for nature-based solutions, that I think that covers a lot of what that we talked about for natural infrastructure. You can search by program, by the topic, by whether there's a match required. This is a work in progress. So if you see a program that you know of that's not on here, let me know. It was developed mostly, as I said, for our water team, so it may not be as relevant, but I think is a good starting point for understanding what federal programs there are that can fund kind of natural infrastructure work. The other thing I want to point your attention to is, and this will be a link from the White House, they recently released like a roadmap for nature-based solutions to fight climate change. This is a long link, I apologize, but I'm sure folks don't necessarily want to read really long reports from the White House, but this will link you to a like resource document they pulled together called the Nature-Based Solutions Resource Guide. And the end pages of that guide have just a big table of all these federal resources from all these different agencies around particular programs, but also tools like mapping tools in some cases that your communities can use. So I would encourage folks maybe to take a minute and skim through that. I think we'll hopefully have some relevance. And then on the opening panel, what's mentioned, the interagency working group that's focused on coal and power plant communities has a clearinghouse of funding resources. And I will also drop that link in the chat. And this is regularly updated in a searchable database of funding opportunities from the federal level for programs that are particularly targeted towards energy communities. So I think many of the communities in Appalachia are going to be relevant here. This is not just natural infrastructure funding opportunities. It covers all funding opportunities relevant to energy communities, but is another great resource to look through to start searching for stuff. So those are three resources, George, that I would spend some time looking through. They're not going to be sort of specific to pollinators or to ecological restoration, but they're good starting points. And then I can dig up some other resources, but if folks have other ones, I'd encourage you to put them in the chat. But Thomas, anything for you to add on there?
I'm not quite sure, but the Audubon Society might have some grants available for that as well. And if you can use the DuPont grant as a match for some funds, you might be able to by bits and parcel, put together a little bit more funding to expand the program. But I would maybe start with the Audubon Society, and I'm saying that because the Audubon Society of Western PA is a partner of ours, and we know that they do a lot of meadow planting and restoration for pollinators. So you might find some luck there.
All right, Colette, I think you had your hand raised next.
I'm turning it on. I'm a teacher. I'm not big like y'all. Okay. The big thing we're doing, and Tom, you would probably know this. In Western PA, I am a steel mill child. What happened was what I just want to least the reason why I came into this thing, and I'm definitely going to come tomorrow with the CCC type things. I handled the final reunion of the Civilian Conservation Corps way back in 2001. But the reason why I'm coming in here, if there's any states, my students digitally mapped out with Penn State all the historic CCC camps in the state of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth. We're trying to, because this is the 90th anniversary of the Civilian Conservation Corps, we're trying to get the other states to join us to map out, find a school, organization, or something to map out their states. We have all the locations. And what we're attempting to do is find out how we could possibly, by 2033, which will be the 100th anniversary, to find all 4,200 camps throughout the United States so that high schools, colleges, nonprofits will have a roadmap of what they faced in 1930s and what we can do today. And we're trying to ask that, please, if another state can join us, I can help. The other thing, Tom, you surprised me with the here at Reach Connections, we have workforce pathways. What is an age group? When can a student begin with your type of program? What age group?
Worth hires adults 18 and up.
18 and up.
Yeah. So 18 and up. We've had crew members that are in their mid 60s before. One of our former elder crew members earned the nickname Turbo because he had a turbine engine to still work and was putting some younger folks to shame. And then I would look up the Student Conservation Association for 18 and under.
Student Conservation Organization.
Yes, the association. They do similar work to us.
Okay, thank you.
And Colette, definitely attend the CCC session tomorrow, and the folks
I will be there with bells on it.
great.
I might bring more of our people because I didn't realize
Please
there was the workforce involved, and we deal with a lot of STEM here at and we have a lot of certifications and everything. So I'll definitely bring some more people tomorrow too.
Yeah, please do. And I mean, Reimagine can help with this too, but the project you mentioned sounds really fascinating and something I would imagine your Pennsylvania's congressional delegation, including Senator Casey, who's been a big champion.
We have been trying to get the
of
other
the
states
CCC.
to join us. And what I laughed at, DCED had a map similar to it. They had worked on it for 3 years with all of.
Oh, you went on mute.
We had our kids do it in 3 months versus 3 years.
Oh,
And the reason why we need that map, and the neat thing is I came from Pittsburgh, but I live near the Army War College and have access to all the maps. And we're just beginning to discover if a high school lives near a camp, we created an app, you can hold it up to the sky and know where the nearest camp is. So if you're going to do a MIWI, an environmental restoration project, you can check to see what the CCCs did in the 1930s and then create a project. And imagine, Tom, a whole high school involved to help you on National Public Lands Day, Earth Day. It becomes a community involvement project.
that's, yeah, very, very cool.
Penn
Thank you
State
for
has
sharing.
room for 10 more states without me going for a grant. So please, if your state wants to map something out, let me know, please.
All right. Well, I know I think we're in this session until 12:50. So we're running a little bit short on time. And I know Amy and Helen, you have questions, so definitely want to get to those. I do want to, I want to make sure if folks have ideas, particularly, I mean, there's so much we could discuss in this space, but I think, I serve on Reimagine Appalachia's executive committee and I'm really engaged. And so Reimagine is interested particularly in the space of natural infrastructure, but the connection to workforce and how can we take advantage of these federal funds and be really thoughtful about making sure people can get jobs in natural infrastructure, have the trainings. And I think Tom is really, and Landforce is a great example of how thoughtful they are about, it's not just, build a trail, it's packaging it with all these other trainings and educational opportunities and really setting people up for success. So curious, in your work or with your questions, how can Reimagine really be helpful in that particular space across Appalachia? So if you have any thoughts there or any, I would love to hear them, either put them in the chat or pipe up. But Helen, let's get to your question or thought.
So here in Pittsburgh, City Council person Deb Gross in District 7 championed the City Farms bill. to help fund gardening, urban agriculture throughout the Pittsburgh region. And that included Duncan Park. I used to work for Lawrenceville United, and will still be regularly helping to support Duncan Park as an edible food forest. So it seems to combine kind of natural infrastructure using native plants like pawpaws and blueberries and a whole host of native edible plants. Could the funding go toward helping support such projects? Hopefully even like creating good jobs to help maintain such sources of foods, and helping to distribute them equitably to those where the food is most needed. So this type of agriculture has been extremely successful globally, especially in high poverty areas. It's a low maintenance type of agriculture that produces highly nutritious food and a really diverse range of calories. And of course, agriculture is one of the biggest, producers of emissions. So such projects seem to combine several needs, just transition jobs, reducing the footprint of traditional agriculture, and providing healthy food sources in a more efficient way, reducing the cost of transportation and distribution. So do you think that such projects would qualify for funding within this from these funding sources?
Well, curious if other folks have thoughts, but yeah, absolutely. I think it's all in matching your idea to the opportunities that are out there, and there are a lot. So I would encourage you also, the resources that I shared earlier are good starting points. There's money in these bills for the USDA to have there's a lot of USDA dollars that I think would probably be relevant. I know there's funding for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. There's funding to help farmers kind of use climate smart practices. I admittedly am less familiar with all of the USDA programs, but there's certainly probably opportunities. It's a matter of like thinking creatively about what's out there and learning about the potential opportunities, which I don't want to diminish, is can be a lot of work because these are really big bills and there's a lot in there. And I also want to be clear, the funding opportunities are sort of going to be ongoing for a number of years, and different agencies, federal agencies, are in different places in terms of getting dollars out the door. And some of those dollars, I said, are competitive grants where you might apply directly to USDA. Some of those maybe dollars USDA or others are going to give to Pennsylvania, and then the state ag agency or other agencies distribute them. So the short answer is yes, and it would just depend on sort of finding a match for your idea. But absolutely, I think so. So it's definitely worth exploring and maybe talking to some partners.
I was not just thinking of my project. I was thinking of Reimagine Appalachia supporting such regenerative agriculture and infrastructure, helping to really, put more of a focus on such projects which serve multiple needs.
Yeah.
If there is indeed, and I could talk to Patty DeMarco more about this too, how I can plug in and help, recruit other organizations to support such work.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, definitely talk to Patty or me. I'll put my link my email in the chat. But yeah, one of the things Reimagine is interested in doing is like elevating what stories do we need to elevate with our policymakers, with the public, to help tell these stories and highlight the needs. So I don't know, it seems like a cool story about an edible food forest, and talking about the pawpaw is always fun and wonderful. So America's only tropical fruit. So absolutely get in touch with Patty or myself.
I would say also get in touch with PASA. Sarah Nicholas is on this call as well. And we wrote the regenerative agriculture paper together for Reimagine Appalachia. But PASA, the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, has a lot of resources in edible food and edible food gardens in communities. So it's a really great resource to use. And it's available.
Yay, PASA, I love PASA.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Amy has been waiting patiently. Amy, please go ahead.
Sure, just a couple of comments. As a Pittsburgher as well, I just wanted to thank Thomas and Elisa for reminding me of the good work of Land Force. And I think the next time I go for a walk up at Hazelwood Greenway, I'm going to experience the space a little bit differently, knowing all that's gone into it through your cruise. And I also wanted to share a resource. It's a somewhat new resource. It's called the Trail Skills Project. And as you were showing, Thomas, the different skills that people learn and certifications and so forth, I thought of that project, and I thought this would be a good one for people to know about it. It's a website that was developed by American Trails, and it's a place for people who have tangible trail building and maintenance skills to be put onto a map. And for people who are looking for trail builders to go to the map and to look for people. And so I think for anyone who's here across, Appalachia, that, getting onto that map could be useful and could be, help to create pathways to federal jobs as well, because, the agencies will be using this map as well. So I just put it in the chat and just wanted to share that with the group.
I'll double down on that and say that American Trails is a great organization. I would also suggest Professional Trail Builders Association and Keystone Trails Association here in Pennsylvania, as well as good resources for workshops. And We Can Serve PA does a lot of training programs as well, and they also offer a trail training grant that comes out every year. So a lot of good resources out there for trail work. And Amy, enjoy your walk.
Well, thanks so much, Amy. Sorry to be on video for a minute, but any other, I think we're almost out of time or are out of time, but any other questions or comments or thoughts, connections, particularly sort of directions that you think or other ways Reimagine could be useful? Would love to hear those, including, do you think more events like this where we can bring folks together and talk about natural infrastructure, where we could elevate on the ground work like Land Force? Do we need more sort of research or policy briefs on this? Would love to hear what folks think or what needs you might have, if any. But if you don't have any, that's okay too. I know there's probably a lot of info to digest and to take away from. Well, I think we can return from this breakout session back to the main room, and there's another set of breakout sessions that will start around 1. There'll be another one focused on natural infrastructure that I'm also co-facilitating. So if you want to stay in the natural infrastructure track, you can stay there. But Thomas, any final wonderful words from you, or Patty, anything else?
Again, thanks for showing up to this breakout room. And Jessica, this was great to learn from you as well. So thank you very much. And thank you, Patty, as well. Patty, you're muted.
I wanted to thank everybody for coming to this session and to recognize that we have, for the first time in the Farm Bill, funds for regenerative agriculture for farmers to convert from conventional to organic practice, regardless of the size of the farm. And that support goes for 3 years, which is plenty of time for a farmer to shift over practices that are destructive to practices that are regenerative. This is a real breakthrough event. And I have to thank, again, my colleagues at Jessica and Sarah Nicholas, and people who've really worked on the lobbying to get that to happen. It was a major lift. Because that agency has traditionally been really hostile to small farmers and to regenerative practices on a large scale. So I take this as a real true ray of hope in recreating a living ground for growing food, as opposed to a chemically supported sterile ground for growing food. So I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you at another session soon.
Great. Thanks, Patty. I dropped my email in the chat as well in case folks want to get in touch. And yeah, the next set of breakout sessions start at 1. So if you click the leave room little blue button in the corner, you'll leave the room and be directed back into the main room and can pick a new breakout session. So thanks everyone for your time and your work. Talk to you later.